video is going to be looking at Caesar's dictatorship, which is essentially a shortish, well, medium-sized section of Suetonius and two different coins that Caesar produced in this period. So these sources are basically going to show you some of the actions that Caesar took while he was dictator, and a lot of it is about Caesar trying to show how nice a guy he was, despite the fact that he's obviously dictator and was towards the end of his dictator for life. So we can see some of the positive actions. So, for example, Caesar gave every infantry of his veteran legions 240 gold pieces, and he also gave them land. So he's rewarding his soldiers for their loyalty straight after the civil war for obvious reasons. It's not just the soldiers that he is trying to curry favour with. So he gives every member of the commons, so basically all the plebs, they receive some grain and a lot of oil, which I'm sure is very helpful. And he also gives them loads of gold, which he'd promised. And there'd been a delay, so he gave them another gold piece. So whether you want to highlight that bit as well is up to you. He also then reduced the amount of rent for all tenants in Rome who were paying sort of 20 gold pieces rent or less. So he's kind of throwing his weight in with the poorest of the poor in, well, not the poorest of the poor, but like the really struggling class in Rome at this particular time. So then he also, I just realised I didn't highlight this very well. There we go. Gives out, or sort of puts on a public banquet and gives out a lot of meat, which is very nice. And there's some lunches, which is nice. And he basically is just giving out loads of food. So you're beginning to spot a bit of a pattern here. So he's giving out money. He's giving out food. He's ensuring popularity. So you could suggest that this is the beginning of what's called bread and circus. Kind of. It's more of an emperor thing, but we do see some patterns of behaviour that start with Caesar. And it's called bread and circus because the emperors, or in this case Caesar, who remember is not an emperor, he is just a dictator, gives out to the people food, so bread, but it could be any food, and circus is talking about games. So obviously we've had the food and the money up here, and then we're having some information about the games. So he mounts a whole series of diverse public shows. And then there's a big list of them. I didn't highlight too many of them because it gets very repetitive. So we've got gladiatorials, we've got stage plays, we have races, athletic competitions. He even puts on a naval battle in one of the rivers. So these are really spectacular games, and these would have been either cut price or free for people to enter. So again, he's kind of trying to make sure he's really popular with all parts of society, but particularly the plebs. And it gives you a little bit more detail about some people who were fighting, but it's not particularly interesting, to be honest. And he sort of puts on some more races at the Circus Maximus, which held something like 250,000 people. It's huge. He extends it as well. He has wild beast combats for 5 days. It gives you, again, sort of the scale of what we're talking about here. So 500 infantry, 30 cavalry, and 20 elephants. So these were absolutely huge, absolutely huge. 3 days of athletics. Let's highlight that one. Why not? There's a naval battle, like I've already said, which he made sure that a lake was built. And they quite literally were like proper naval battles. So they would have reenactment of these big, like life-size boats floating in the water, and they would sort of fight. So it's quite a spectacular sort of scene to view. So, and then sort of this bit talks about how the fact that it was so popular that everyone had to sleep in tents to get in first, kind of like going trying to see a concert of your favourite boy band, I guess, but you know, people dying in battles instead, and that people were crushed, which is also not very good. So that's all the games and the food and all the festivals and all the fun stuff. There's a really important change he makes, which is to reform the calendar. So basically it got out of, I remember saying this in lesson, it got out of sync because of the negligence of the calendar, so all the seasons were in the wrong place. So it gives you some information about what he did here. I've not highlighted it, but we can talk it through anyway. So Caesar was a really intelligent guy, and he was really interested in astronomy alongside other things. And he was aware that there was actually 365 days in a year plus a little bit more with the leap year. So he was the first person in the Roman calendar to move it from to put in an extra 10 days into the calendar, and then also adding in this leap year as necessary. And obviously, the dates in terms of the number of months don't add up to what we have in our calendar, but this is the first time it's being used in the Roman times. So he adds in a couple of extra months, fine. So that's just information about the calendar. Makes sure that everything's kind of in sync. So it's not a particularly exciting reform, but it's a really important administrative reform. So you're seeing kind of like he's kind of covering all sort of areas that would affect Roman lives. So he has to refill the Senate, not because he's killed lots of people, but because obviously there was a civil war. So he enrolls new patricians. So he would take equestrian families and raise them up to become patrician class. He also increases the number of magistrates, so increases the quota of praetors, aedils and quaestors, again for this administration, to make it a lot easier to run the city and the empire. He changes how the elections are run. So he arranged elections with the commons, that's the people. So set for the consuls, half the magistrates would be chosen by the people, while the other half were his personal nominees. This gives you a bit of also an insight in terms of the level of power that Caesar had. So yes, he is kind of ensuring there is some sort of democracy, but it's only partial democracy because he is controlling, obviously, half the magistrates in the city, which is obviously not good. He then changes the jury service back to the equestrians and the Senate. So that stops any plebs from standing other than equestrians. So talking about the urban poor. He also changes the way that they sort of register grain entitlements to ensure that people, the right people, will get in the grain. And this would not have been popular. He reduced the number of people who could get grain by half. So not everything he's doing is necessarily to sort of make everybody happy, but he's obviously trying to make sure the city can run more efficiently. And Caesar was very keen on administrative changes. He wanted the city to run properly. He then has a little bit more restrictions on people's behaviour. So no citizen between the ages of 20 and 40, unless he's in the army, could be absent from Italy for more than 3 consecutive years. People had to basically stay in Italy. No senator's son could travel abroad except for as a member of a magistrate's household or staff. So it's really restricting the senatorial class in their movements. Interesting, this next one is to help with unemployment. So at least a third of the cattlemen employed by graziers must be freeborn. So he's trying to ensure that employment can go up because there's going to be less slaves. He also confers citizenship. Oh, so I've lost my mouse. Where has it gone? Oh, there it is. Sorry. On all medical practitioners and teachers of liberal arts. So he's giving out citizenship as well. Now, there have been some people who had been asking for the cancellation of debts, but he refuses to do this. But what he does do is he says that those who were owed the money had to accept a valuation of their debtors' assets at pre-war prices. Because obviously during a war, prices always go up. And he sort of says you have to deduct from that any sort of interest already paid, etc., etc. So all of that reduced the level of debt by about a quarter. So he doesn't do what people want, which is to cancel the debts, but he does reduce them quite significantly, which is a positive. He dissolved all the guilds except the ancient ones. So this is basically undoing some of what Clodius had done. So those Clodiani gangs are now removed. He also increased penalties for crime, which is obviously very sensible. He punished the murderers of freemen by seizing the whole of their property. Again, remember that the richest never got punished the same as the poor. So if you were senatorial or patrician, you would often lose some property and maybe go into exile if you murdered somebody. So this is just kind of securing that in law a little bit more clearly. So this is quite a nice sentence for just kind of, because none of this is, I appreciate, particularly thrilling, but hey, here we are. So he administered justice extremely strictly and conscientiously. That's nice. Dismissing senators convicted of extortion from the order. Okay, that would have made obviously some of them unhappy, but it's good. You can't have people who are extorting people in the Senate. It's not clever. Imposing the import of duties on foreign wares. So that would obviously impact on trade, which is not great. Now, there's some quite specific ones here which would have affected the senatorial class. So he forbade the use of litters. So that's when you would be carried through the streets in kind of like a seat, but like, that's really hard to explain. I'm sure you've seen lots of kind of films set in medieval times and Roman times when a really important person is being carried in like a chair that's got like a curtain around them. That's kind of like a litter, that and the attendants are all part of the litter. It's a really weird word. So he forbids this. So this would have obviously impacted on the senatorial class in particular. And he also says he can't wear scarlet robes and pearls, sorry, specifically, except on set days by those of suitable age and status. So it's quite restrictive. What he's trying to do is basically stop people showing off their wealth. And he went further than this and actually had a law against luxury. So the idea you couldn't just sort of spend your money on everything you wanted to do, because it would make people jealous, I guess. And he was trying to make people seem a little bit more pious than they possibly were. We also have a couple of coins that you need to be aware of. So if we take this first coin here, we obviously have a female head, no significance of the woman particularly, but what she is wearing is an oak wreath and a diadem, so that's kind of like a headband, I guess, but that's symbolising of victory. And then on the other side, you can see that we have a trophy with a Gallic shield, so this is from symbolising France, and we also have a captured Gaul here. And then you can see obviously Caesar's name. So the idea of this coin is that Caesar's reminding the Roman people of his Gallic successes. So he's trying to show that he was victorious, and that would also help keep support for him as well. Now the second coin is slightly more convoluted explanation. So we have the head of Venus, as in the goddess Venus, also wearing a diadem, which is just like a crown stroke headband thing. And I'll come to what's going on over on this side. So Julius Caesar's family, the Julians, believed that they could trace their lineage back to Venus. Now this is not particularly unusual at the time. A lot of the patrician families in Rome would claim that they came from the gods. So the Julian bloodline claimed that they came from Venus. So that's why Venus is on this particular coin. On the other side, we have, hang on, I'm making sure I get this right around. So we have this guy here called Aeneas, which I would type in for you, but I've got nowhere to type it. That's annoying. Oh well. Oh, there we go. So we have Aeneas, who is standing. There you go, Aeneas. And he's kind of carrying some symbolic-y things. Don't worry about that. And we have on his shoulder a guy called Anchises. Right. So Aeneas is stood there, and then we have Anchises on his shoulder here. Now, without going into masses of detail, it will become important when we do section A, to be honest. But this guy here, Aeneas, was claimed to be one of the founders of Rome, and he also came from Troy. He was also claimed to be linked to the gods and was one, I think, a half son from memory of possibly Venus or someone else. I have to double check at some point before the next videos. Now, because he comes from Troy, a lot of the Romans thought that it was better that they came from Troy than from the founding of the city, of the true story. Obviously not true story. Obviously the Roman myth is there's Romulus and Remus. They were brothers. Romulus kills Remus and founds the city. And a lot of the Romans, particularly patricians, did not like the fact that they came from a supposed murderer. So the reason why Aeneas is being portrayed in this way is Caesar is claiming he comes from Aeneas's family, who were noble Greek Trojans back in the ancient times, as it were, and that makes him better than necessarily kind of a Romulus and Remus background. Again, it's trying to sort of show that he comes from this really important lineage. So his family comes from Venus, the goddess Venus, not the planet, and he also can link his family back to this guy here, Aeneas, who was a hero of Troy. So again, it's kind of this promotion of Caesar as a great leader, as an important leader, as a great general, got there eventually, tied in with his use of games and festivals and money and food and administration. You can kind of see the kind of generous, but also from the gods, important leader, and therefore rightful dictator, that the image that Caesar is trying to put forward.